satellites?
A satellite represents a journey, information gathering, this journey around the Earth.
Satellite haiku. Welcome, everyone. The first thing I would say is, while I was making breakfast this morning, I watched. Do you know this guy Ezra Klein?
Yeah. I used to listen to him, or I used to read his when he started Vox. I used to read his columns, and and then I guess New York Times bought Vox, I think, and now he
is that
I don't know, but I listen to his podcast once in a while.
Yeah, and he's an opinion writer for New York Times now in their opinion section, I guess.
Yeah,
but I didn't realize is a separate section. Like they there's like the news gatherers, and then there's like a whole different office that isn't supposed to like talk back and forth. So that way, like the opinion can be like, what's the word?
Like firewalled away from the.
Yeah, like it wouldn't be like
sequestered.
Sequestered is a good term. Yeah, or divorced from. No, that's a bad word. Anyway, so what's interesting is I've always been a big fan. I am a big fan of his. I think he's really smart. He has a great perspectives. Right before the election, he had a podcast episode where he was basically like slamming Democrats and calamity, like bell ringers who were saying, this is terrible. And he was basically saying, tone it down. This is not doing anyone any good. And that might have been accurate, but the way he was going about it was definitely very much like Trump really won't be that bad. Right. Yeah. And he goes, looking at his past term, how he was blocked by all these different things. And then I feel like this morning the other odd thing, and I would hate it if he was like ever listened to our podcast, but like he's also gone from being like the nerdiest guy in the room to trying to be the coolest dude. Like he grew this beard and he wears Armani suits and he's like, I guess he has
like I feel like Nate Silver had that same arc a little bit. Like Nate Silver has sort of become a weird kind of villain, like a nerd villain.
Yeah, totally. Anyway, he really did. Yeah. He went to work for
wasn't 538 also bought by the New York Times? Maybe it's something about the New York Times purchasing you that turns you into that takes you from nerd intellectual to nerd villain.
Whoever bought it, he left and he actually went to work for Peter Thiel, which that felt like the villain of the villain. Like he's like,
that's his full. He fully flipped into full villain. Yeah.
In the Batman pantheon, like that, Peter Thiel is like the Penguin's uncle. Like he's just like one of the worst criminals, in our billionaire criminal network. The Penguin's uncle. But
So anyway, what was Ezra Klein saying? Yeah.
Well, yeah. So he was definitely he was ringing the alarm bells about. And he went back and he found in 2019, Steve Bannon said, the way we work this is we flood the zone with three things every day that are calamitous. And the media is only really capable of digesting and analyzing and kind of responding to one of them. So you just every day you do three annoying, dumb sort of, performative things that are distracting. And then he used the term muzzle velocity. So he said, which I guess is like the speed with which you deliver the blow, like the one. And he said, like, you don't need to accomplish any of these things. Like you basically like, as soon as you say the Muslim ban, it gets knocked down by a federal judge and then it goes through the courts and then you can't do it. Right. But you just kind of flood the zone. So anyway,
but by saying Muslim ban, you basically trigger this whole series of mechanisms that the media tries to cover, all the court cases and all that. Right. Like, so,
yeah.
So like, even, it was real enough that it kicked off a legal battle. But, like all they had to do was do one little, it's kind of like, I guess my metaphor would be if I had a glass of milk in my hand and it would take me 1 second to drop it on the floor and it would shatter the glass and spill milk everywhere. And it would take a few people to come clean that up. Meanwhile, I could drop 20 other glasses of milk. I could break a window.
Yeah, that's a great analogy.
Like in the time it took them to just clean that one mess, I could make 100 other messes.
Right.
And they're
yeah,
not fake messes. They would be real messes.
No, they're real messes. I mean, one of his examples was, he said, the other thing he said was that that Donald Trump has never wanted to run, and never wanted to be the president. He's always wanted to be a king, which I thought was an interesting, like he said, even back when he said he was a mega 100 millionaire who lost all of his daddy's money. Mm-hmm. Then he pretended to be a billionaire on a show for 10 years and kind of clawed his way back to financial security somehow, after going bankrupt 4 times. And then he goes, then he goes, so when he came down the escalator, like he always thought like, well, I'll just do whatever I want. And the 3 branches of government, like I never even studied that in school. Like I don't even remember.
No, he doesn't. He has no clue about any of that.
It's no clue about how it works, like what a judge does, what a,
I don't think he even, like he doesn't have any interest in being a king in terms of governance either. Like he doesn't want, he likes winning. Like the idea of winning the election is what he wants, because that's sort of like, just like his whole life, he's always been obsessed with where he sat in the ratings, you know what I mean? Like the Nielsen ratings and all that, right? Like, he's always obsessed with this sort of outside validation to prove to him that he's won or that he's winning. So I think what he wanted was to win the election. That's the reward. So that itself is the reword. And
it was so painful to lose that he never admitted, he never really admitted it. And so you're right. The reward is that he won. And then the latest thing with turning Gaza into the Riviera of the Eastern Mediterranean, like you can tell he knows that everyone's going to freak out, because he said, like, in his press conference, he goes, I don't mean to sort of be flippant about it, but it should be like the Riviera. Like he's basically sort of, and then when someone said, well, if you get rid of the Palestinians, who's going to live there? And he goes, the world's people. Which, like, is he basically saying like, it'll be like Monaco, like you can buy if you're a celebrity?
That's what he's saying. Yeah. But I don't think, I think Trump, and I think this is true of the billionaires, like Peter Thiel and Andrew, when you hear Mark Andreessen, I listened to him on Sam Harris's podcast a while back. And, I have mixed feelings about Sam Harris for sure. But, Andreessen, and then I read and listened to some of his appearance on Ross Do Shit, whatever that guy's name is from the New York Times, like opinion, do that. Yeah. Anyway, and it's just so clear when you hear these guys talk, Peter Thiel, Andreessen, Elon Musk, and Trump. This is a perfect example, this Gaza thing. They don't see most humans as people. Like they imagine themselves as the only people on earth that have any agency. And the rest of us are sort of NPCs in their mind, right? Like we are either NPCs or drones who exist to kind of a non-playable character, like in a video game. It's just like when you're walking through a video game, it's just like the CPU controls like the sort of the background characters, right?
Yeah, sure.
That's what we are to them. We're like background characters. We're either that, like either they see the rest of us as sort of drones whose purpose on Earth is to kind of do their bidding, to be their workers, to serve them in some way, or just get out of the way. Or either they see the rest of humanity either as that, like Trump has no conception of Palestinian people, as humans that have any kind of agency or rights or anything, right? Like he just, and it's so clear from so many things Trump says, he just has sort of, he's like pathologically incapable of seeing humans as human beings, like other humans, right? Like, so, and I think that when you hear all these guys talk, that's what comes across, is they see the rest of us as kind of like, we're just like to the extent that we sort of like stand up for ourselves or assert our own agency or look out for our own interests as humans, to the extent that any of us do that, we are an obstacle to them. Like we are an inconvenience. And so our job in their mind is to just shut up and do the work in their companies and stuff, right? Like, That's what really came across in Andreessen's most recent appearance on that Ross Douthat podcast. Like he just, and so when you're talking about like Trump saying that the Gaza should be the Riviera for the world, like it doesn't even occur to him that Palestinians have some claim or right or anything, that they even exist, that they have any agency at all.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, and again, like he's not a student of history, so he doesn't even understand how this place came to be, or that a two-state solution is what most of the neighbors want. And he's saying thinks that he could bully Egypt and Jordan into like taking the Palestinians. Like that would be his solution.
Right. But like if you try to sort of communicate any of that to him, like the historical context, the political dynamics, all of that, like none of it would register, because somewhere even deeper than that, he doesn't even recognize other people as human beings.
Right. It's true. I worry quite a bit that when we watched what happened with, to your point, that he really does care, like when the stock market plummeted on Monday because of the dumb tariffs with Mexico and Canada, he rolled it back. Like he got on the phone with them and they were like, let's not do it for a month, and we'll do what we promised to do. And whatever. Like
we'll just keep doing what we're doing and we'll give you credit for it.
Exactly. Yeah. Like it's like renaming Obamacare Trump Care, and then just changing the name on the website, and that's it. Right. And it's like, it's amazing, it's so good. And it's like, but that's really what the Canadians said. They were like, well, they had this agreement with Biden, and then they were already putting in anti-fentanyl like stuff, and they're like, yeah, we'll just doing we're going to do this, this, and this.
Have a fentanyl czar? Okay. We already have a guy doing that. It's like, Jeff, you're a czar now, okay?
Exactly.
I'm stealing that from a TikTok I saw the other day, but basically that was a parody. Like that's what happened.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. And so he definitely is. What I worry about is that he gets in a room with someone like Netanyahu, who is savvy and knows how to mold him like clay using using his narcissistic tendencies and flattering him. Like I bet all of those leaders were like, wow, you're so smart and so strong, and without you, none of this could have happened. Thanks. And here's what I think.
Oh, he eats that up. Yeah,
he eats it up. And then they probably put like words in his mouth, like, and what would be even more amazing is if you said it's the Riviera and we'll just clean it up and the US will do it. How about that? The US will take over. And it's like, no one has authorized like troops on the ground in Gaza, and he's like,
but that's the thing I've been thinking about. It's like the whole notion of being authorized to do something has just gone out the window, right? Yeah. Like they're just doing, like you got Elon Musk there just doing whatever he feels like doing. And, the Republicans are the only ones who could stop him because they have the majorities, right? And so, they've just gone full Vichy mode.
It's true. They really have. Yeah, it's true. And I think, anyway, so one thing that Ezra Klein said this morning, which was, to me, was kind of like, just for me, I was jumping from his podcast before the election where he was kind of telling us to tone it down and not be so calamitous about a potential win. And then this one, which was, he was telling us he wants to be a king, but watch, so many of his attempts at changing things won't work, and one of the things he went into was, he goes, there's a Reddit thread for federal employees with 49,000 members, and they're starting to just say, like, resist, like we're not going to take the buyout, we're not going to do this, we're just going to do our jobs and see what happens. It's going to be a lot harder to change. Did you know that 40% of the federal workforce works for the VA? Doctors and nurses.
Yeah. I mean, the federal work, it's huge. And the VA, the Department of Defense, and the Department of Homeland Security, those is a vast majority of people. Yeah. Yeah.
And this idea that there's like, just millions of deep state bureaucrats, like working behind the scenes, like it's not exactly.
Not only that there are that, but like that like some huge number of them are the sort of wokest kind of, like queer, POC, whatever. Like that's what they want to get rid of. And they have this idea that like, I mean, I think that's why he went after USAID first, USAID.
Yeah,
because I think in his mind, like he thinks this agency itself is creating wokeism in the world somehow. You know, like without it, we wouldn't care about anybody else. So like,
right. It's like the instrument of our empathy put into political action. And he wants
that's
to
what he thinks.
Kill it in the cradle, like kill it in the cradle. Huh.
Yeah.
So anyway, I try not, I've been face down deep in this dive, this video edit dive. So I try to like every once in a while, like I'd see the cover of the New York Times, right? Or I'd watch like one of the, like Stephen Colbert or something. And like I don't really want to hear the news, but
I don't either. It's just so fucking hard. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Yeah. I don't want to hear the news.
Yeah,
but it's hard. You can't stay out of it completely. And the thing I've been thinking about, the thing I have a hard time not ruminating on is as I sort of pick up things, because I'm the same way. I'm like, I'm not just sort of fully invested in the news all the time. I'd be insane. I would throw myself out the window, right? Like, but I'm just tuned in to enough to see kind of what's going on. And the thing that I have trouble not ruminating on is just like, I keep thinking of, and it's again, my family are sort of avatars for this for me. It's just like, I ask myself, like, how are people okay with this? You know, like, you're like, what are people, first of all, like, are the people who voted for this guy really okay with like an unelected billionaire unilaterally just carrying through agencies? Like, he wants to shut down OSHA. Like, really? I mean, it makes sense that Musk would want to shut down OSHA because he runs factories, right? Like, worker protections and whatnot. Like, I don't know. The thing and I haven't talked to my family about this because I don't want to hear their answers, kind of, right? Like, so all the possibilities that I can think of they all suck. Like, there's the possibility that they just don't have any clue that any of this is happening.
Which is scary.
Or they are on board with it and they're excited about like shutting down OSHA or whatever, right? Like, and about like one guy being able to do it by himself with his bros, that's the freaky thing. Like, all of this stuff, there's government bureaucracy and bloat and all that, but it was all co-created by all of us, right? The American people. And so the idea that any one person, unelected, can go through and just chop it up is crazy.
Yeah.
But so the thing I have trouble not ruminating on is just like, I keep thinking about, the people who kind of voted for that stuff. Are they on board with it? That's the question I kind of keep asking myself. And I wish I could stop thinking about that.
Right. And to your point, like, I think that several of those possible scenarios are scary. One of which is, as you say, like they like it. Like, maybe they're just like, I wanted to see someone go in there and kick the can around, break things. Like someone said that the tech bros brought the move fast and break things model to government.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what they've done. Yeah.
Which if that's what a lot of voters wanted to see, because they're just sick of both parties.
Like, if we literally elected and appointed him to do that, even if the Republicans had a sort of a pretense of performance of appointing Musk to do some job and gave him some sort of legal authority, like, even that would be a little bit better than just like, let's just give him the password, I guess. Like, it's fucking weird.
It is pretty weird.
It's insane.
And it's a continuation of what I said from the first term, which was, actually, one of my friends once said that Donald Trump is a novel virus that is training the immune system of democracy as to all of its weaknesses. In other words, like, it doesn't have T cells to fight.
And this time it's not just him. This is why it's worse this time, is because it's all him plus Musk and, Thiel and all these guys.
As you say, they're unappointed, unelected friends of the president. It's like, we haven't really seen that, I don't think, historically. Like, someone bringing, it'd be one thing if they appointed all of their friends and somehow pushed them through the Senate and got them into these, seats.
At least you would think, if they did that, at least you would sort of have some sense that, like, they care about the appearance of legality, right?
Yeah.
Like right now, they just basically have said, you know what? The laws don't really matter. The Constitution doesn't really matter. We'll just ignore all that. Like, we don't really care that all. And think about how terrifying that would be if you are like an ally of the US and you know, you think like you watch the US from Australia or something and you're like, they're just becoming a rogue state with like nuclear, like, what are they going to do next? Like, you have no clue. Like,
well,
they just basically have said that the Constitution and laws, none of that means anything anymore. That's what's happening right now.
And you know how like we have the 5 eyes and the 14 eyes, like they're countries that are like, you know, we're in a treaty with them to share intelligence information. Like if we pick up chatter on a cell network of some terrorist thing that's gonna, like someone's gonna bomb Sydney, we tell the Australians, look at this, and we give it to them, right? So imagine if you're one of the 5 eyes, you know, like what is it? France, England, Australia. Who else is in there? Germany. You would be like, do we pull out of the 5 eyes? Like, do we just shut it off? You know, it's kind of a weird.
Totally. Yeah. So that stuff's on my mind. It's hard not to.
Remember when Obama hacked Angela Merkel's phone? And that was one of the things.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
You know, revealed, and it was so embarrassing. Like, because it was sort of like he's like the good guy, and he's like, "Hey, Angela, you know, this is really awkward, but we did tap your phone. Just wanted to know what you were thinking behind closed doors." You know what I mean? Like, what? That must have been such an awkward conversation.
Yeah. Oh my God.
But speaking of
so it's crazy. I've been reading, and the other thing, like I know you always say that you're the one who catastrophizes. I feel like I've been doing that lately. Like I have been reading. So I've been reading. Like I've been reading this book. I can't remember the title, but it's basically a whole bunch of interviews with people in the former Soviet Union who it's kind of like they're people who lived through USSR, you know, decades, and then through the Gorbachev kind of Yeltsin transition, right? And it sort of ends with Putin, but it's basically interviewing all these people about like, you know, what did you experience as Russia kind of like went from communism to what it is now, and as the Soviet Union dissolved. And so it's interviews with all these people in Russia and in Belarus and, you know, all these other countries. And it's crazy. Like just I don't know. So like, I keep thinking about like what holds what sort of maintains order in it. You know, you asked a while back, like, I think right after the election, we were talking about just the fear of like, you know, sectarian violence or civil war. Like that's catastrophic thinking in a way, right? Mm-hmm. But so I think a lot about like what sort of stops that stuff from happening, or what makes it happen. Like where does it? At what is the sort of location of where those like tipping points happen? Like is it happening at the government? And there's part of me that like I see all these examples of political violence in these countries, and the place where I feel like it happens is at the tip of the rifle. Basically, it's like the people with guns either decide to start shooting or they don't. You know what I mean? Mm. So like in a police sort of crackdown, a military crackdown, you know, like you either have the police and the people with guns that go, yeah, we're willing to kill our neighbors, you know, for this idea or for this guy or whatever, or we're not. And it comes down to sort of individual decisions of the people who have guns and their fingers on the trigger. Like a failed coup fails because the people with the guns decide not to shoot their fellow citizens or whatever, right? Right. Like that's the thing that, yeah. So I think, you know, I don't know. It's interesting to see. Anyway, so I've been kind of fascinated with like Russia has gone through a whole bunch of iterations in the last 100 years. You know, you had the communist revolution, you have years of USSR, you have now you have Putin, you have the French Republic, we're on Republic number 5 for France.
Well,
right. So like we think of France, you think of France and you're like, oh, France has been around for a while, for a few hundred years. Well, no, France has gone through like major iterations over they're in the 5th Republic of France right now. They've had 4 other republics that failed, basically 4 Frances that totally failed, and a couple of attempts at empire in the middle there. And, then you have like Germany and Japan. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Look where Let Them Eat Cake got the aristocracy, like the guillotine is like, that's sort of, if you were to map it over, that's the billionaires saying a bunch of just, what did you call them? NCPs
and NPCs, non-playable characters. Or
NPC. It's like that's the equivalent to me of like Let Them Eat Cake. Yeah. And that sort of like total cognitive dissonance where you end up under the guillotine and you're like, but why? And then it's like, well, you push it too far, the people freak out. One thing to your point, I was to go back to that whole question about how do these, I looked at the Arab Spring. Remember these Arab, like Egypt and all of those Arab countries along North Africa, they had dictators for 30, 40 years. And then what brought them down was shooting protesters in the square. Just shooting them randomly, and that was like a step too far. Maduro did that. He shot students that were protesting, and it just put a dark, cold, prickly blanket on the revolution. Like there was no, so like there are places like in Myanmar, for instance, or North Korea, where there just hasn't been. But these other places, when you push it too far, Yemen, all of those, like Algeria, Tunisia, those countries, even Egypt fell. The dictatorship ended because they shot people in the streets.
Right. But I think again, I think it comes down to what's happening on those very streets. Like who's doing the shooting and are they willing to actually do the shooting? And then how many people on the other side of that shooting go, we're just going to hunker down and protect my own family. And just like hopefully we don't get shot. Like that's what I've been fascinated by reading this accounts of people in the Soviet Union. Like there's just people talking about how much they loved Stalin, right? Like I was a Stalin, and they're just like cheerleaders for Stalin. And they're like, yeah, my neighbors were getting disappeared, but like for whatever reason, I kept loving Stalin, it's just like crazy, right? So that's what I mean. That's what I mean. Like, I think that's what makes the difference is like, it's not what's happening at the top and what the government decides to do. It's what the people with the guns just themselves decide to do on those streets.
Yeah.
That makes the difference.
When we look at the founding fathers, there were many obviously deep flaws in this sort of just out of the box ingredients of rich landowning white men said all men are created equal, but they meant, we now know that they meant give women the right to vote. You can't, slavery is ended. But at the time it wasn't the case. But they did have these arguments, in the the letters of the Confederacy, when they were arguing over like, well, how should the executive branch? What is Article 4? What should these positions be? And they clearly didn't want a king, and they were worried about a demagogue who was influenced by business interests and foreign governments, and was a populist and could sort of Pied Piper lead the people to vote for him against their interests, right? That was something that they like literally talked about. And so we have the Fourth Estate, the media, which is meant to be the free press. Again, like Rupert Murdoch really messed with the free press in some ways by finding that ingredients, like that sort of like way to get people angry and keep, so he, pulled the rug out from under like the idea of pure journalism to me that like it's a deep wound that we still suffer. And then you've got these like the fact that the Congress makes laws and controls the purse, and the president is supposed to execute the laws. And so I guess what my point is, like, one thing that we had a civil war, but we've never had like a long-term, we haven't had a coup, really, right? We haven't had like a violent coup. And I do think that a civil war
we haven't had a completely failed government either, right? Like the Civil War was the example of that. Yeah.
Closest thing. And we still held elections, and we still, I think what's interesting is I do think that the founding fathers set up their game theory was smart enough to look ahead and to create enough layers of overlapping checks and balances that it would be hard for one particular branch to seize control and throw all the other ones in jail and just kind of lead like a dictator. Now, when you go to ask the question about the army, like our army, has not a $900 billion a year budget. And we have a ton of weapons that don't really, it's hard to imagine like our army sort of moving as one to support a dictator or to not, it's really, that's.
Yeah, I mean, our army is a slice of America right now.
Yeah.
I mean, our military, not just the army, but the military. Yeah, I think what you mean. But it's a slice of America. Like, it's very diverse, not just racially and gender wise, but ideologically diverse. Like, there's a lot of left-leaning people in the military, and I don't, so I sort of think like it's hard to imagine a seizure, like a seizure of power being able to trickle down all the way through the ranks. Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's true.
But what's easier to imagine is a totally failed government that just can't do its job anymore. And like there's a lot of steps in between kind of what's happening now with like Musk and the Vichy Republicans just kind of like saying laws don't matter anymore. Like that's super alarming. There's a lot of steps between that. And like, like when we start talking about who has the guns and what are they going to do, right? Like there are a lot of steps in between, but like, and it could be years in between, but there's a lot of countries that sort of operate with a like Russia is a good example of a country that operates with basically a non-functioning government and has for years. It just doesn't operate for the people really. And the people of Russia don't, they just don't benefit from a functioning government. But it's still a powerful country and it does its thing and people live there and they get by, right? And so I feel like it's very easy to imagine us falling into this sort of like Russia type country where we're just sort of one more kind of powerful sort of basically non-functioning government on the earth with a strong guy in leadership. And a lot of people suffer in Russia, like there's no free press and, like, so if you're an intellectual in Russia, a teacher or a professor or a writer or an artist or whatever, like it's a fucked up place to live.
It's true. When you read like the voices of Soviet dissidents that were living under Soviet rule, Solzhenitsyn or something, or like someone in East Germany under the Stasi and stuff, and it sounds hellish, right? Like it sounds like hell on earth that your neighbors are spying on you and you can't say something. I remember once Arundhati Roy, this was back in like the late 90s. Arundhati Roy, the writer of The God of Small Things, the Booker Prize winner, she's become very political, and she spoke out against a hydroelectric project that would flood a valley with thousands of farmers. And the government was just going to build it and flood them and move them to the city, like into some subsidized housing or something. So she spoke out against it, and the Supreme Court of India held her in contempt and put her in jail for 90 days. And she was speaking to Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! And she said, this was during the era of George Bush, so it must have been early 2000s. Yeah. So she goes, you can walk into a bar in America and you could say, George Bush is a fucking asshole. And it's freedom of speech and no one arrests you and throws you in jail for 90 days. She goes, so keep in mind that like you may hate George Bush or you may hate his policies, but you're allowed to say he's a fucking asshole because of the Constitution. And in India, you're not. You're just not. Like you're not
Absolutely.
allowed to say.
Like right. And so we have these sort of fundamental rights that we just totally take for granted. I mean, I'll just tell one other anecdote that's similar from this book of Russian interviews I'm reading, or former Soviet interviews. And there was a woman that was talking about how her dad, came back he was a war veteran and he had suffered and he had no legs or whatever. And, fighting under Stalin and basically stuff like people who were prisoners of war who didn't die, like in battle, if they were captured and didn't die, they were treated as basically criminals. Like it basically told like to Stalin, that was like, oh, you didn't die. You allowed yourself to be captured. That means you surrendered, which means, you didn't fight to the death for the country. And so like these people were, persona non grata. They were outcasts. They were criminals. They were not given any government services. They were abused, whatever. Right. So, anyway, this woman's father, a veteran. So Stalin dies, and she hears her dad say to her, like, oh, guess what, fucker, that fucker finally died, or whatever. Like he says something, kind of glib like that. And she's like, but she was talking about how she was grappling with whether she should turn her dad in for saying that, like her father.
Yeah.
For like saying sort of an offensive for like sort of being flip about whether Stalin died. And she was like, I was ready to turn in my own father because I loved Stalin that much.
Yeah.
It's just wild.
You know what? Okay, here's an interesting perspective that so remember when we turned 18 and we took what was his name? We called him Puer, but Eric Hodner's class. It was philosophy or something, philosophy or government. I forget what it was. It must have been philosophy. Yeah. But so he took us down to the all-purpose building to register to vote, anyone who was 18, right? Do you remember that? And I remember that my parents were like, John McCain Republicans. They were like very like centrist. My dad actually voted for John Anderson, who was an independent at one point. But I registered as a Republican, and I remember being in the line, and everyone, all the guys in our class, registered Republican. And you voted as a Democrat. And I remember thinking, that's so. It felt very team-like. Like you're on this other team, and I'm on a team, and it felt like, why is he on that team? Like I remember thinking, like, wow, I hadn't even thought, like I just did because my parents were registered Republicans. And anyway, so I was looking today. I guess I was looking at Twitter, but I saw a photo of.
So you shouldn't say that on this podcast because I could be arrested, next week. Because I'm a Democrat all the way back there. Yeah, all the way back to when I initially registered in high school. Like I've never been loyal to this regime. I'm done for now, man. You put my freedom at risk.
I don't know if this is fake news, but I've heard that one of the tests, if you want to stay in the agencies, that one of the tests is, when did you have your MAGA awakening?
Oh shit!
So
sorry,
like,
I shouldn't even laugh. Like what?
You could be fuck? Like, for decades, I just was just so distorted and twisted up in this knot trying to be a Democrat. And now, what a sense of relief. I've become a MAGA. It's like this really weird, when did you have your MAGA awakening? So, okay. So I'm looking at this photo, and
that's probably fake news, but the fact that we don't know whether it's fake just says something itself. Yeah.
Right. Like any person working in one of these agencies could make that up and email them their friends and say, hey, they asked me this in an interview, and who knows? So
it would be completely plausible. Yeah.
But I see, yesterday Donald Trump signed this dumb bill that makes it illegal for trans athletes to be in women. Like, I don't even know exactly what the bill states, but basically it's banning trans athletes from competing against someone of a different gender, right? Yeah. So he's got all these little girls around him, and it's this creepy performative thing. And he's sitting at that little desk. He likes to sit at that little desk. The tiny little. It's like a child's desk. And he does. It's weird. He sits at and then all the girls stand, and their heads are here, and he's like on this little desk, and he's like, "What do you?" And he's like, it's really odd. But anyway, so and at one point he says, I'll probably get in trouble for saying this, but you're very good looking. You're all very attractive, and you're going to grow up to be very attractive. And I'll probably get in trouble for saying, he keeps saying, like he's been told, don't say anything like that. And he'll be like,
don't be creepy.
You know that the handlers have said, please don't mention that they're beautiful or anything about their physical.
And that is almost basically, to say that to Trump almost guarantees that he's going to And he's offended that somebody would try to boss him around or constrain him.
Yeah, and he, in some ways, I've done this too. And there was that joke that what was that idiot's name? The guy that had the talk show that was like a Rush Limbaugh kind of parallel. He's gone back. He's flip-flopped back and forth, white hair. You know what I'm talking about? He was a coke addict before. But anyway, he always used to say, something really unapproachable, like women shouldn't be scientists. Oh, did I just say that out loud? Like he would make a joke about saying something horrible to sort of soften the blow. And that's what Trump does, where he goes, I probably shouldn't be saying this.
Yeah.
Or they told me, often he'll say, they told me not to say this, but you love it, so I'm going to say it anyway. He does that a lot in rallies, you know?
Yeah, he does that a lot. Yeah.
Backstage, they told me not to say this, but you want to hear it, so I'm going to say it for you. Like that's kind of this way he bonds with the audience. Anyway, so my long story short, I come around to, I'm looking at this photo, and it's a photo of some senator who's got his hand cheering for the signing of this executive order for the non-transgender athletes, you know, like elementary school swimmers can't be, like statistically, what is that? Like, that's just such a dumb, it's such a dumb.
Yeah. I mean, you're targeting like 12 people in the country.
And to make such a huge deal to rile up 50 million people, you're targeting 12 people. It just seems like, disproportionate. So anyway, so he's got his hands up, and there's this attractive blonde woman next to him, and she's smiling and cheering too. And he writes in the tweet, or the excrete, he writes in the excrete, so-and-so has been a champion for, banning trans youth in sports for as long as I can remember. Something like that. Like he's like, here, yay to her. She finally got it done, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And I'm looking at them both, and they're so happy. And they feel like they've accomplished something. And there was a part of me that just felt like, has that always been, like, have we, like, bringing us back around to where you registered as a D and I registered as a Republican, like, if you had done something, if one of the guys that I was in line with had gotten some dumb thing about trans passed, would I be cheering? Like, what? I just don't, I guess I don't identify at all. Yeah. They look like normal people. They look like they could be my neighbors. They look, but why are they so focused on this thing that I just disagree with them on? Like, why is it such a huge win?
That seems literally cruel. It's like gratuitous. It's like taking sort of like, it's gleeful cruelty. It's weird. Yeah. And it's gratuitous cruelty. It's like they don't get anything for it. Like I remember people at seeing pictures of the Republican National Convention this past year, and people holding up the mass deportations now signs. Like they pan to I didn't watch it on TV, but like saw photos later of like the crowd holding up these signs, mass deportations now. And it's just like a bunch of older white people, like just with huge grins on their faces, holding up mass deportations now. And it's the same kind of thing. It's like, they're so gleeful about this idea. And, Nancy Mace, I think this congresswoman or senator, from
South
Carolina.
Runs into the bathroom and she
she excreted on X that supposedly, I didn't read this. I mean, I saw a screenshot of it, but that that they should live stream the deportations, like so people can kind of just like watch it as entertainment. And it's just like, holy shit! Like, what kind of people are these? Yeah, it's super weird. I can't connect to that at all. I don't get it. Yeah. Yeah, but like, I don't know, maybe, because when you were younger, like, would you have gone along with that at the time, or would I have? I don't know. Yeah.
There were, I guess, I'm thinking back to high school, when I was at the public high school next door. I mean, there was anti-Semitism. There was idiots who spray painted swastikas on someone's car, like that kind of shit happened. There was certainly homophobia. Like if someone was
for sure,
or gay, there's a lot of sort of fag this and fag, like people being cool.
I mean, you in that community, you had to be closeted if you were gay. Like you could never be out and gay, for sure.
Yeah. And interestingly, Bernathen had a bunch of gay men who were married to Picayune women. Yeah. That were out, and like they would, they were pretty
sort of out. I mean, they were married to women, right? So they weren't
their husband. It
was sort of an open secret, I guess, right. But they weren't like out. Like they weren't living with those men and stuff, right? Like they were married.
Yeah, they had their own. Yeah, they did. Yeah.
Okay, so they were pushing up against the line of being closeted. Like they were out. Like everybody knew they were gay, but they were. I don't know. Sort of a weird gray area.
Yeah, it's almost like back then, like it was acceptable unless their wife had called for a divorce angrily. But if not, then everyone else had to just sort of go along with it.
But it wasn't like an official thing. Like you sort of knew, and it's not the kind of thing where you couldn't publicly, like there would be no public recognition of the fact that they were gay. Like you would never hear, you would hear interpersonal conversations maybe about it, but you would never have like any recognition on any official level that, like,
and it was almost
we
like,
have gay people in our community. Like that wasn't a thing that you talked about that would have been acknowledged at all.
They didn't march in, there was no rainbow parade in Bernathen, put it that way. There was no, and they didn't lead it. And so they weren't, you're right. They weren't publicly out promoting.
It was a weird gray area, but yeah. It
was an interesting time. Yeah. And
I mean, and we had some gay students at the academy too, that were for sure, that came out later, but they could never be out gay in school because it was a very homophobic environment for sure. Yeah.
I wonder if wealth insulated people from that, because I've heard of, like, for instance, my ex-wife who's a lesbian and married to a woman, she moved to Kentucky. And in the South, there are what they call horse lesbians, who are like very wealthy people who breed horses. And they breed like race horses, like $1 million stallions and stuff. And they, it's just acceptable to be a lesbian couple if you're a horse lesbian, like in the South. And you're
I think the whole conservative relationship to homosexuality in the LGBTQIA, LGBTQ plus community is super weird right now, because you think like gay marriage was legalized, and it sort of like felt like sort of a done deal. But there's been, like in the last 10 years, definitely a backlash, not just to the trans issue, but like to homosexuality, to any of that, right? Like, so this sort of slandering people as groomers and all that, right? Like that. At the same time, you have like Peter Thiel, who's gay, right? Who's a gay right winger. So there's lots of gay people who are right wingers. There's lots of gay people who are anti-trans. But there are also lots of right wingers who are anti all of that, like, who aren't okay with any of it. And so their relationship with Peter Thiel and his with them is just kind of an interesting paradox, I guess.
I'd say Caitlyn Jenner is another example of, in some ways, wealth creating this odd buffer zone, because Caitlyn Jenner, by the way, like I cut the back of Bruce Jenner out of the Wheaties box when he was like, the cover of the Wheaties box. And when he won the decathlon, and put him on my wall. Like I did track, and I was like trying to do all,
He was cool. Yeah.
And if Caitlyn Jenner's like super pro Trump MAGA, like, and in California, anti-homelessness. Like, I don't want to look across and see someone sleeping on, get rid of it, and yet you could imagine that that doesn't fly at like CPAC, like if Caitlyn Jenner came to speak at CPAC.
I feel like at least conservatives that I feel like there's sort of this way that people accept individuals, but without accepting it's sort of like love the sinner, but hate the sin kind of. I think that's sort of their approach to it. That's what it seems like. It's sort of like, well, he's one of us, but like this whole thing that, they just don't sort of acknowledge that side of him. Right. Like, and same with Peter Thiel. And there's almost kind of like a pride, like, oh, it's like when a Democrat becomes a Republican, right? It's like, oh, that person switched, like they're sort of, it's really unlikely that person's with us, but that's even more exciting to them, is that, so like the idea that, like, how they, like anytime there's a person of color, they're always like right in the front row of any kind of, you know what I mean? So like there is a weird sort of like, they like to display those people that would be, that you're sort of like supposed to be surprised are siding with that political sort of side, right? So I think that's how they sort of look at Caitlyn Jenner and Peter Thiel and all these people. Like that's the argument they tell themselves, like, oh, it's cool that person, you wouldn't think they'd be with us, but they're with us, like.
You know, it was really fun to watch, and there's little tiny nuggets of Schadenfreude that you can consume and then enjoy. Like during the election, when the North Carolina governor's race, that the Republican who won the primary was that African American dude that was like, he
the
just
crazy
was
guy. Yeah.
like a list of everything that I wouldn't like. Like he didn't think women should have the right to vote. He was a he had sexually abused people. The one that had that was like had a used his actual Gmail to like log into these like porn sites where you write these long nasty things.
Yeah.
And and he wrote about how he had sex with his sister's, his wife's sister and stuff. It just was like such a weird thing. And to watch like Donald Trump had sort of had condoned him, or sort of what's the word, he endorsed him early on, and then when the shit started hitting the fan, he just was like, I don't know. He just like didn't really talk yes or no about it. And I think they were kind of hoping that guy would win, just because.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But it was like watching, like he literally was the fact that he got any votes at all to me is kind of astounding, because like you're like, he's sort of, it's for wasn't he like he was like a part-time pastor of like a church, like he was.
I think so. Yeah,
like
I don't. Yeah.
Luckily,
I've memory hold that guy a little bit. Like,
sure. Sorry to bring him back up.
No, it's fine. Yeah.
There was like a sweet sense of Schadenfreude to watch that, like they stuck by him, like the establishment of the Republican in North Carolina, which is a swing state.
Just to watch the sort of the confusion and conflicts they were sort of wrestling with was the Schadenfreude. Yeah.
Exactly. Or when a news pundit would ask one of the representatives, one of their like Byron McDonald's or whatever, an African-American Republican on Fox, let's say, and they'd say, so are you still supporting this guy? And just watching them sort of weirdly backpedal and kind of do like a Matrix sort of, try to not answer the question, but like not say anything bad about him, but like hope he wins, like.
Yeah. The gymnastics they would do, kind of wild for sure. Yeah.
I think a really, really fascinating question is, how are there so many Democratic governors in bright red states? It's a really interesting question.
Gerrymandering is really what it is. It sort of proves the effectiveness of gerrymandering because you have
Mitch McConnell, Kentucky, and Rand Paul. That's not the
true.
Senate race, is a statewide race. So gerrymandering is for the state house. And if the whole state votes,
it's true. Like they have senators that are Republican or deep red Republican.
Isn't that odd? Yeah, like North Carolina, and they have a Democratic and then Iowa. There's like a woman, an old white-haired woman, who's the governor of the state, and she's a Democrat. And you're like, and won by like 19 points. Like I
think that itself is one reason why I think Democrats are so they try to. Play the center so much, I think the Democratic Party looks at that and goes, that is the secret to winning the national election. We need to find like the sort of that probably white guy who somehow appeals to who we need to find that kind of person who can win win the governor job in a red state, and they keep trying to run that person as president.
Would I always tell
Kamala Harris tried to sort of pretend she was that person, or maybe she is, who knows? Like, I think that was one of the reactions people had to her, was that they didn't know what she was. She was sort of pandering to all kinds of different constituencies.
Yeah. And, and I often tell my wife who was born in Colombia, like, Americans love governors for president. And I think it's because we're always disgruntled about the lack of action in Washington, like the Beltway people. There's like lobbyists and all this shit. We feel like the people who go to Washington and represent us just don't. So we love to call in a governor because we feel like the governor is from the countryside, has answered and solved like local problems that people really cared about, like a lot of kitchen table issues in Arizona, and they've dealt with those things, and if they've proven themselves with 2 terms, we like them to come in and be the executive, because that's where we can have the voice of the people in the countryside can actually bust through that beltway, what's the word? Like the traffic jam that happens.
The gridlock. Yeah.
Gridlock, yeah. And it's true. I mean, you just look back historically, like, Reagan was the governor of California, Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton.
Yeah. Like there's, and on the other side of that, senators have a really poor track record of winning, the White House. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a really interesting question. I know, I've withdrew myself from like the Pima Democratic Party, like infrastructure, and I don't think I fit in. I'm not like a political player the way I was maybe thought I should be. But watching my, the folks at my friend group on Threads and getting together to sort of examine what happened to the party, where it should be, where it should go. One of the things I learned when I started in 2020 doing volunteer work for the Democrats here, I remember asking my friend who'd been had run for office and had done a bunch of things for years. I said, "So what's our biggest problem?" And he goes, "Well, under the umbrella of the Democratic Party, there are 54 special interest groups in Pima County that have their own website, their own agenda, their own fundraising mechanisms, and they, and it could be like, I'm for immigrant rights, I'm for trans, I'm Latinos for in the e-commerce thing, like whatever it is." That's the problem, is that we don't move as one, and like. Yeah. And like,
I think that you're basically pointing to what everybody is oversimplifying and sort of semi-mislabeling as identity politics is the problem with the Democratic Party. Like in those ways, I think it is. It ends up being creating sort of a fractured non-coalition, not moving as one.
Yeah, and I've read some recent kind of suggestions around. For instance, when we look at parliamentary systems where you have coalition building, like you have to make a deal. Like even Netanyahu lost so many times trying to build a government that he had to reach out to the Arab Party. And you cut deals. Like, and that's how like cutting of deals, like we will not do this and we want to because you are going to help us get, you know what I mean? And I feel like we've kind of strayed so far away from, like, I don't see those 54 special interest groups that consider themselves Democrats. Imagine if you could break it up and there were 54 parties. I know that sounds ridiculous, but if there are 54 parties and they had to form coalitions, like you had to have like all the people that are pro-labor and workers' rights and would form like a union party. And then there's one that, and yeah, like the union party one wouldn't be for trans rights, like because it just isn't. So it's like, that's what I
it's
think
like fighting climate change with bigots or whatever, like you gotta, like, you gotta, So anyway, I think about that kind of thing for sure. Sometimes like there's like unwillingness that, you pick an issue like climate change, for example, and there's definitely an unwillingness on the left for sure to like link arms with somebody who, maybe is homophobic or something, right? Like you can't fight climate change with that person because they are an asshole in this other way. And I don't know. I mean, like, I get that. It makes a lot of sense. And I get the emotional sort of resistance there, but it also prevents anything from getting done. I get that. It's not just emotional resistance, it's moral resistance, it's spiritual resistance to linking arms with that person to fight climate change. But, there's also the truth that the only way you're going to break that person's homophobia, the only possible way that you could do that is by linking arms with them, right? Like, I wrote a thing about this not that long ago, but it was just kind of like, how do you break through somebody's ideology and convert them over to your side? Like if what you want to do is that if you really are offended by some other ideology and you think it's a problem in the world, how do you defeat that ideology? And there's really two ways to defeat it. One is you basically just constrain them legally and socially and whatever. You kind of like marginalize those people in some way. Like you seize power. Like if you are the government in power, you basically make their life harder. Like if they're a bigot, you you make it hard for them to get a job as a bigot because you out them as a bigot, whatever, right? Like you either make it hard for them to live in that ideology, and so they kind of go underground with it, or you convince them that you're right, that they should believe what you believe, right? Like there's two ways to diffuse their, quote unquote offensive ideology. You either don't really defeat it, you just kind of make it hard. And even James Madison in the Federalist Papers kind of wrote that, like when you have these sort of factions, the two ways you can sort of defeat an ideological faction are you either kind of constrain them with the law and with the sort of social, they become social outcasts, or you sort of like persuade them over to your side. You become allies with them, and they drop their ideology, right? And there's lots of stories of that. You hear lots of stories of KKK people who, maybe they became friends with a black guy in prison or something, right? And then they were like, oh, why am I a white supremacist? And they sort of just shed that whole side of themselves. And there's lots of stories like that. And they all happen through interpersonal kind of generosity. So you do have to link arms with people that you find kind of offensive. And if you're going to do that in the service of fighting climate change, that, like fighting climate change with bigots should be a thing.
I remember having this experience during that sort of Tea Party era, like when Sarah Palin was like leading the, vice president, that race with McCain. And so we started reading about Rand Paul, who was one of the Tea Party guys, the pushers, And I remember reading an article by his dad, Ron, who was a libertarian. They were, interestingly enough, both doctors. Like I think he was an OBGYN. And I remember thinking, like, he goes, well, true libertarian, you don't want the government telling you what to do. So I'm pro-choice because the government shouldn't tell me what to do with my body. I'm pro-marijuana legalization, not because I like smoking weed, but because the government shouldn't tell me. And I was like thinking, like, weird, like this is like the last guy in the world that I would sort of have some symbiosis with, some kind of, like agreement with. And it's interesting to hear that. And I feel like that what MAGA did was it sort of hijacked the Tea Party movement, and then all the libertarianism fell out of it. You know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah,
the idea that
it wasn't real. It wasn't real libertarianism because it fell out of it so easily. Yeah,
I fell out of it so easily. Like the idea that you would have a nationwide abortion ban is anathema to a libertarian. Like it's just
absolutely.
The government shouldn't tell you anything to do with your body. Like what the hell? And then like, don't tell me to take a vaccine. Don't tell me to not have an abortion.
Makes me think of that old expression that conservatives want to be protected by the law, but not bound by the law. So they want to seize the law. They want to own the law. They want to wield the law as a weapon. They want it to protect them. They just don't want it to constrain them. And I guess that's true of anybody to some degree, but like you really see it starkly in the sort of that right-wing sort of,
well, remember the Tim Walz, back to the governor thing, like Tim Walz populism, where he said, as countryside people, like we just don't want our neighbors telling us what to do. So like the government shouldn't be telling what to do. And I remember thinking, like, why doesn't that fly with like all rural MAGAs? Like, why isn't that like that message? Isn't that folksy, keep the government out of your business, no matter what it is, But you're right. Like there's some point where some, pro-life evangelical Christian just is like, no, that's exactly what I want is the government to tell them not to ever have an abortion, not to use birth control. Well,
but like if you put those exact same words into somebody who didn't have the blue color on them and the D label on them, they would love it. They would eat it up. So there is a whole bunch of other stuff working against Tim Walz that's just so deeply ingrained.
Yeah, that's true. Do you want to do first world problems? Do you have one?
Yeah, I guess we're at the end. No, you go first, and then I have something else.
So my first world problem is again an interface thing. So I'm using I'm editing in Adobe Premiere Pro Beta, which I know and then I jumped into After Effects, which I once took a class at an Adobe conference on like intro to After Effects, and the teacher said, it was about 50 of us in a conference room, and he goes, raise your hand if when you open the program in the morning, do you feel a sense of anxiety and dread? And does a small trickle of sweat run down under your arm? And everyone was kind of like, yeah, it's just such a dense, hard to look at program. It gets to so many layered things that you click open, like 12 things appear. And you have to remember where everything is, and like none of it makes sense. There's like a lot of icons with the guy's nose sticking down over a line, and like what the fuck is that? Like he's peeking at something. What the hell? Like what does that icon mean? So anyway, so the guy goes, well, I'll tell you what. I've been on the development team for 15 years. And he goes, when I open the program, I feel a sense of dread and anxiety because I look at it and go, it's just too much. Like, so anyway, so I dove in there and I was like, hey, I bet it can do this. I needed to like trace a figure that's moving on in front of a background and then change the background, right? And which is fairly like benign, thing. But I kind of wasted an entire day wrestling with it. And the interface is just, as I say, like none of the icons are intuitive. Like they don't mean anything to you until someone tells you what they mean. You know what I mean? And there's like 200 of them on like the homepage of like and so that's my first world problem is like, it's when your brain hurts and aches like that from trying to learn a new thing, it's good to develop new neural pathways. I get that. That's fine. And I don't mind learning new things, but ouch, that is a painful, and it has not gotten any better. And I didn't accomplish it.
Makes me think of like an old photo of like, this is really going back, but there was an old photo, a screenshot of Microsoft Word with all of every single one of the toolbars and menus enabled. And like the document window was like 8 pixels tall at that point. Yeah. So many things.
That's exactly the case. And anyway, so do you have a first world problem? Anything?
Yeah, my first world problem is, so I was thinking about this the other day. I got an email from some software service I pay for. And it basically, the headline of the email was something like exciting new updates, right? Like, and there was something when I read that, just like exciting new updates, the feeling I had was just like, I'm going to open this email and it's going to be they're going to tell me that they're charging me more per month now. And it's not going to be anything better. If anything, what they're going to announce in this email is going to be somehow worse than what it already is. Mm-hmm. And it's going to cost more. And then I just started thinking about like, I feel like it's almost automatic that if you see a company tell you that it's improved something, your initial intuition is they made it worse. And I just started thinking about like, why is that my intuition? Like when a company tells me they made something better, why is my intuition that they're going to spin something worse as better? They're trying to rationalize their shittier product as better somehow. And that's what I'm about to read. And I'm supposed to sort of buy that as better, but it's going to be worse. So anyway, I was just thinking about the state of product and software in the world and how just it's almost automatic that if they say it's better, it's actually worse. So that's my first world problem.
I totally buy it there. Well, Satellite Haiku, it's always great to have these conversations. What did we say, 35 years of these?
Holy shit, yeah, I guess so, yeah. 35 years, yeah, of these conversations.
I'm turning 56. You're already 56. I'm turning 56 next week.
That's right, yeah.
We're in 9 days or something. Yeah.
So I won't wish you happy birthday. I'll wish you happy birthday next week when we talk.
That sounds fair. Yeah, that's good.
Satellites? A satellite represents a journey, information gathering, this journey around the Earth.